Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I happen to be in Tobago, and so I came to Trinidad for a few days. I'm with my best friend from college, and I got to show her my father's farm and meet some family and some friends. And now we're in Tobago, and she's windsurfing at Pigeon Point. Has to be the most beautiful beach I've ever seen, and it's just so picturesque. And then I just came back to come and do this our biweekly podcast, The Filmmaker's Life. And in the Filmmaker's Life, we talk to filmmakers who have had probably more experience than a lot of the people who come and watch the podcast and who work with me. And we get all kinds of different stories and basically about paths people have followed in their careers. And, you know, when I started doing this podcast, which was right when COVID hit, I didn't realize the truth of it, which is every single filmmaker has a different path than every other filmmaker. There's no two paths that are the same. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming Christina Kiely. We worked together some time back, and we're going to learn all about Christina's path. So I don't start with a bio because we're going to learn that as we go along. But my first question that I'm going to ask you, Christina, I just got to get us in the right place. There we are. My first question that I always like to ask filmmakers is, when did you first know you were a filmmaker?
Hi, thank you for having me, Joanne. I wish I were in as warm a place as you. I'm in New York right now where it's freezing. When did I realize I was a filmmaker? I don't know if anyone realizes that at one moment. Maybe some people do, but I realized I was a high school teacher actually first, right out of university,
What
and I taught well, I ended up teaching video production, but I but
Oh,
I but I taught history. I taught uh mostly most of the time I taught young people who were either had been incarcerated or had children of their own, so teenage moms. And it was through this a few different programs that I worked in Boston, in the Boston area. And I realized that I kept on wanting to talk to all these people about their stories. And I had been an art and history major in college and photography. And so I was sort of doing photography documentary in college. And my instinct kept on being to get these kids who had really struggling lives to make videos about themselves. So I went to my first step was I went to community access television, and I learned my first.
can you actually tell everybody what community access television is? I think you're the first person that I've had on the podcast talk about community access television, but that is definitely a way in for many, many people. Could you just tell us?
Absolutely. So I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they had it. You can look it up. It still exists. It's called Cambridge Community Access, and and everybody has it. We have them here in New York, and it's quite big in New York. But just about anybody can go. I think you just have to be over the age of 18 or something, and then for free or almost free, they provide classes in everything. It's paid for by through grants and local government, and I learned everything. Now, this is a long time ago, so I learned reel to reel editing. But I learned how to shoot a little bit. I learned how to light a set. I learned how to and then they immediately, because there are no rules really, except for don't do anything distasteful and don't do anything pornographic. That's the extent of the rules. And so they let me have my own show, and I had a show, and I didn't know anything, and I put on, and my husband likes to tease me about how hilarious my show was. I did a talk show called Pies and Politics, where I would bake a pie and talk about a political subject. And then I had my own clips that I had put in, but who knows? But the beauty of community access was that I didn't feel any pressure. I didn't feel I had come from a very pressured education, very high level education, where everyone had to be the absolute top, 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 top. And there was something very beautiful about community access where I know everybody there was someone from a completely different experience than mine, and they had different reasons why they were there. Some people wanted to do religious programming, some people wanted to do yoga programming, you name it, and some people just wanted to test out something without having to go to film school or something like that. So that was how I started.
It's great. I mean, community access is exactly what it says. It's for anyone in the community. I can see the place. When I lived in San Francisco, I lived on Market Street, and if I just walked to the end of Market Street, there was the community access
Right.
TV station. Oh, I lived on Van Ness, sorry, and the community access was on Market Street right there. So you're right, every community has community access TV, and you'll find shows about everything under the sun. But I love Pies and Politics.
I think you can still find it somewhere on their channel. It's funny forever. But the other thing about community access is because they keep up with the times, right? That with the technology, about 20 years, 25 years ago, once editing had changed and become a nonlinear, and I had already been working in the business for a while, but I didn't have an opportunity to learn how to edit. I went back to community access in New York, and I took a class on Avid, and I became an Avid editor from taking that, and it cost me $50.
Wow. You got a whole career for $50.
Essentially, yeah.
That's really, really amazing.
Yeah.
I know other places like in San Francisco, we had BAVAC, Bay Area Film and Video Coalition, which is really well thought of, and they have incredibly low cost, often no cost. But community access is its own thing. It really is its own thing, and it's a great way for democracy to thrive, because
Absolutely.
everybody gets to make their own shows and say their own things, and
Right.
so long as it's not distasteful or pornographic in any way, then so you too can have a show today.
Yes, exactly, today. And I don't know how, I think now, and because that was actually a channel that people could tune to in the local area. Now I think they have YouTube channels. I think that I'm pretty sure most of the community access have YouTube channels.
Yes, fabulous. Oh my gosh, what an interesting story. So after so we didn't get to the answer to my question, which is
I'm so sorry.
No, it's my fault, because I interrupted you. I'm always interrupting my guests. I think that's
quite all right.
I'm like, could we just go back a little bit? So you were getting to when you first knew.
Realized I was a filmmaker. So I was a high school teacher. I was taking this community access classes at night. And then I realized I was going to have to sign my contract about whether I was going to come back the next year to teach. And this is not a nice reflection on me, but you have to be who you are. I spoke to the other teachers. Now I was 23, 24, somewhere in that zone, 23. And all the other teachers in the program, I assumed that they were about 60 years old, each of them. And so I went and spoke to them about their advice, and it turned out they were all about 30. And so what I suddenly realized is that this work that we did was so hard,
Wow.
and that it had really broken these people, and I had to ask myself whether I could be someone who was willing to break myself, because it's a very specific type of person who is, and I completely applaud them. They were amazing, but they had utterly devoted their lives, and I realized that that would not make me happy. That it was that I wanted to come back, which I've done in certain ways, but that I had to step away from it to try something. And I had one of those moments of, you're 25 years old. What do if you could do anything, what would it be? And
Great question to ask. Great
that's,
question to ask. If I could start all over again, I'd be a sound engineer.
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, if I could do it all, I'd just be like, listening to stuff and
Oh,
tweaking.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the answer to your question then when you asked yourself that?
The answer was taking a big leap, and my best friend from high school and I made a pinky promise, and we got into a U-Haul and moved to New York, and we agreed that if after 1 year we didn't make it in some way, that we would leave. And she was a hopeful chef, and I wanted to get a job in television, and so she went to the French Culinary Institute and became a fabulous chef at places that I delightfully got to eat for free when I had no money. And,
That's a friend.
and it
That's
was a
a
great
friend.
friend to have. And I loved it when she practiced her exams on me.
Wow.
And we couldn't afford to live in New York City. We lived in New Jersey and took the commuter train in, and I got a job as a production assistant at a PBS series called Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television, which was a weekend series, a weekly weekend. So if you remember the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour on
Yes.
PBS, so it was what's now I just called the PBS News Hour. It was the weekend edition, and it was featuring Charlene Hunter Galt, who was the anchor, and it was an incredible experience to learn
Wow.
everything, because it was a PBS series that was very fly by the seat of your pants, and everybody had to learn everything, and so we did.
Wow. What a great opportunity.
It
Fantastic.
was amazing. It was
Yeah.
crazy, wild.
It also makes sense to go make the step from community tele access to PBS. That makes sense as a
Yes.
way. But to get on such a big show, that's amazing. So yeah, I'm sure you learned everything. And I think that we still haven't got to the time where you realize you were a filmmaker, but you're already working in the field for a long time before you were making your own stories, is that right?
Yes, for a long time. So I would say that I realized that that's when I made that decision to move to New York,
Yeah.
was the moment that I realized that this was something that if I imagined myself doing that, what I wanted to do, because I forgot one little detail. One of the jobs I had, because I was working also I was doing every job I could to make money, because working as a high school teacher doesn't make you much money. And so I was somewhere where I saw this show, Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television. I saw it, and back in those days you didn't have IMDb where you could check, who's what. So I waited for the credits to go by, and I wrote down, who it was, and then I asked everybody I knew anywhere, anyhow, and finally somebody knew somebody there, and I called them.
Wow, that's another great piece of advice for somebody, finding that connection.
Yeah.
I tell people, have you heard of the book What Color Is My Parachute, which is like a bestseller that's in its 35th edition or something like that, and it's about getting jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be at a talk by the person who wrote it, and he said the number one way to find a job is through a connection. And I mean, it's pretty obvious, but I just think that it's more important that he says it than I say it and that you say it. But anyway, so that guy who wrote What Color Is My Parachute said the number one way to get a job is through a connection. And yet still you'll hear people say, I sent out 600 resumes.
Right. It's the biggest waste of time you could
Yeah.
possibly put in. Yes, I actually, I grew up in a family of teachers,
Mm.
and everybody in my family is a teacher but me, and except now one who I've pulled over to the other side. But therefore, teaching is not a job you get from knowing somebody.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so my parents, they're when I was, my parents were involved in these conversations when I was 23 years old. And when the idea of asking somebody to help me connect, they felt like it was cheating. I was
Oh.
cheating because in academia, in teaching, you follow the rules. You go to the, you get your master's degree or your PhD, and you go ABC, and then there's this conference where you get teaching. And there was a structure of rules, and I was entering a world that had no rules, and they could not conceive of this, and they felt somehow that I was doing something that was somehow wrong,
Underhand and
underhanded.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they actually really deterred me for a long time. I knew some people earlier who I wanted to ask, and they didn't want me to, because they felt that that was cheating.
Wow, that's so
So that
interesting.
was a very interesting thing to learn on my own.
Mm,
I had
mm.
to completely learn on my own, and try to explain to them that that's not cheating. That's how this world works. I mean,
That's
this particular world.
yeah, yeah. But there were so many pieces in that. There was the decision you made, there was the moving across the country, having a partner in crime to do that with,
Mhm.
making that decision, doing it in a year. If it doesn't work, we're out. That. But
Mhm.
I teach a workshop every month, and the last 2 months I've worked on calendaring.
Mhm.
Is having that timetable it makes everything change, and without that nothing happens. So I'm just very interested in hearing you say that we set a year, and if it didn't work we were out,
Right.
but it
Yeah,
did work. But
it did
part
work.
works because of the timeline.
Yes, it made me feel safe to make that choice because I wasn't doing something that was as scary and open-ended.
Right.
And we could go home, I mean, to, whatever, our crazy apartments in Massachusetts, and try again, or go back to teaching, or whatever it was. There were things that we could do, and because New York's daunting, and the world of this nature is daunting.
Yes, yes, yes. So how long did you stay at the news show?
I stayed until it was canceled. And not because it was, just because that's the nature of the business. And so that was 2.5 years there, and I learned everything. And one thing I'll say about that, which is an early lesson too, which is I'm still friends and still work with a lot of those people I met on the there.
Wow.
In fact, my most frequent collaborator is a cinematographer who came in as an intern, and we kind of found our way through this whole thing. But I still work with one of the other DPs from several. I bring them in to teach at my classes when I teach documentary, and that was such, because we were learning all this stuff together, and the guys who ran it they were guys who had been at ABC and CBS and gotten really angry at the networks and decided to throw it away and do something really pure and positive, and started this human rights series, which was so rare. And boy, do I wish it still existed, because it was a really great show.
Yeah.
But they were also, it was a trial by fire in some ways, because they just threw us into every situation. Within 2 seconds, I was suddenly writing scripts for a very famous anchor, and within another week, I was editing a sequence with I mean, there was an editor, but I was the producer, even though I was only a PA. And
Right.
famous people came in because we were working with famous, Desmond Tutu and Yoko Ono appeared. And so, like, it was fun and hilarious, but it was also, you had to learn all these skills, how to behave, how to take, how to learn this thing, how to, so, but it was great. It trained me for so much.
Fantastic. And those collaborations, those creative collaborations are so necessary in this work. because
Mm-hmm.
because I always think, not that I've ever been in the military, but I have a feeling that film and television is a little bit like being in the military. You have to be able to rely on the person.
Yes.
You know, you have to know that that person is going to come through, that they're not going to show up late, that they're not going to drop the ball, you know.
That's everything. It's
Yeah,
not life or death like the military, but everything but otherwise, absolutely.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's more about that than I think anything else. And so you learn like this, if you can rely on someone,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Absolutely.
you know, and if you can't, then
That's how I used to test out my students when I taught at School of Visual Arts. I had the advanced documentary class, and it was a fairly small class. And at the end of the semester, I would tell them all. I mean, it wasn't like telling them like a fake thing. I would have a shoot, like some kind of, and actually sometimes I did like a community thing for like the local city councilman here in New York. And so I needed it to be free. So I would ask my students to come. And then it was always, from then on, I knew exactly who were the reliable people, whether or not they had done well in my class and could serve themselves, whether they were going to show up and be a good worker. And I had, and that was it. That's where the decisions got made, really, right then.
and how many would you say, what was the percentage of people who you could rely on?
Two people,
2 out of how many?
2 out of 10.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just very interesting because when you have that mindset, you think that other people are like you,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not, and it's rare. It's rare to
Mm-hmm.
have people who are actually willing to be that reliable person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I also have to say that when I was younger, I don't know if I was always perfectly reliable. I had to learn that too. And so
Uh-huh.
I try to be forgiving when the reliability, depending on what that reliability is, whether I feel like it's an insecurity that can be trained out of them or whether it's an attitude.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it wasn't that I wasn't reliable. It was just that there were moments of insecurity that somebody could have read as maybe
Right, right.
not a go-getter all the time.
Yes, because what you're talking about with that situation you were thrown into is that you have to take initiative, but sometimes we think maybe we shouldn't be.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
should be stepping up to
Right.
handle getting Desmond Tutu from the airport.
Right. Exactly. Oh, yes.
So
Right.
what did you do when the show was canceled? What was next on the horizon?
Worked for two different filmmakers because it wasn't really a news show, even though it was in that news slot. It was really a documentary series. So what we would do is it was a hybrid of a news magazine and we met and there were a lot of filmmakers who had full films that we would show chunks of those films, like various and so I went and human rights related films, and so I actually went and worked for two of those filmmakers um, who had shows, who had used clips of their shows on our show, and I went and made films as their associate producers, and that's what
So
I did. And
you stepped up to associate producer.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those people knew, because they had worked with those people. They knew what we had learned in only 2.5 years. And they knew what I knew because they realized it was such an incredibly demanding environment.
So is that kind of standard to go from PA to associate producer?
That's the next step. That is the next step. Things have changed a lot. And so I think that it's really interesting having now been the senior producer and having had PAs and APs and sort of the expectation of moving ahead. I remember that pyramid is a tricky one because I definitely wanted to move up and be taken more seriously and get that AP then move on to becoming a producer. And of course, because it was when it was, the men were rising up to become producers while the women were staying associate producers for longer, inevitably. And then, so there was always that, eventually, that shifted a little bit, but it was, then I look at it now and think, I having a great associate producer is a really good thing, and I maybe should have been okay with being an associate producer a little longer. You know what I mean? Like the wanting to rise up the ladder
Right.
isn't always totally to your service. Obviously, it is for money, but you can learn
So,
a lot as an associate producer in documentary. Let's be precise, because I also work in feature fiction, in narratives, and an associate producer is an entirely different beast.
right.
Yeah.
So in the documentary television world, an associate producer is what?
In the documentary television world, the associate producer, and also this is also the case in documentary filmmaking, not just in the television, where they do a lot. They're involved in they really are the support system. I mean, I had my associate producer on my last big series at ABC is now a senior producer at ABC because he was absolutely spectacular. He kept, he was extremely organized, kept everything organized for me. So whether it was the pre-production, production, post, he knew everything about the story. He would get to know, he would be a good translator between me, if there was someone I couldn't deal with at that moment. He knew everything that was going on, so he could talk to people if I didn't always have time. But he was also learning as I was producing and directing the series. He was following along with everything, and so he wasn't just kind of doing the dirty work while I was doing the fun stuff, you know.
Right.
He was involved. He worked with the assistant editor to make sure that to figure out how the whole editing process should be organized and everything. And so and we then got him involved, and he would I invited him to sit when we would sit with the president of ABC to screen the episodes, and he learned a ton.
So by the time you're a producer, are you now in a position where you're making your own stories, or do you get hired on to a project as a producer? How does that work in that world?
So that depends a little bit whether you're doing like a news magazine type thing or whether you are doing more of a documentary. This is where it all fractures a little bit. So it's sort of similar up to that point, and then it kind of breaks apart. Because there are series, so the most common thing I would say, like it's shifted now because of Netflix and Hulu and so on. There are more series, sort of these limited series, right? Versus the news magazine. I mean, I know that 2020 still exists. I don't know anybody who actually watches it. I shouldn't have said that. Maybe they do. Now I'm going to have old friends call me and tell me that was a horrible thing to say. I don't, but genuinely, I'm not sure how many people watch the news magazines. I mean, when I was doing the news magazines, I did Prime Time, which was a series on ABC. Like that was the thing. That's what everybody watched. People still watch, I suppose, 60 Minutes, Nightline, and so on, but less, I think, because there are these series. There's just a lot more competition. When I was working on that PBS series, we had a regular weekly view of 3 million people watching every single week on a PBS series. I don't think that's those numbers. And this series, my first series at ABC, I think we had 6 million people watching every day. I mean, those are numbers you don't have anymore because everything is split apart.
Even at Fox News, I think Fox News has more than, no?
I don't know. No, well, Fox News, like their whatever, like I'm not comparing kind of the daily news.
The daily news. Yeah.
I don't know what their numbers are. I probably do if I reach back into the pit of my brain, but I don't know what their numbers are precisely, depending on the situation, but I'm not talking about daily stuff. I'm talking about
Yes,
long. I've only
yes.
worked in long form. That's my thing.
Right, right.
You know, that's what we call it. That's what you call it. And news is long form.
Yes,
I'm not news,
long,
rather, in the networks.
right.
Yeah. So to answer your question, what a producer does now, there's always the discussion in television of the terminology of director versus producer. So when I was in television, I only worked as a producer, even though there was never any director. I was the director and the producer. That's when things get a little bit dicey in terms of networks and streamers not wanting terminology to affect the bottom line.
Uh-huh.
So because if you're a director, then you can become part of the DGA, and then that affects their finances, and they don't like that. So I was told directly that when I was wherever I was working, whether it was for Discovery or wherever, A&E, ABC, etc., I was a producer, even though I had no director. So that's, and so I was invited to, I got jobs as a producer, whether it was to make, like, for example, I was, for A&E to make I made the biography of Yo-Yo Ma. And that I heard through the grapevine that they were looking for someone, not for the Yo-Yo Ma, but they were looking for new producers um, for the biography shows, and I thought those were fun, and those would be a little bit more relaxing than some of the intense work I had been doing in between, because I just skipped over 10 years of work there where I was doing very dangerous work. And so
Dangerous. What do you
I'll
mean
go back to that in a second. But anyways, and then I met with them, and then they had a bunch of different biographies they were doing, and they asked me if I would be interested in trying Yo-Yo Ma, because they had been trying to do a biography with Yo-Yo Ma, but he had refused 7 years in a row. So they gave it to everybody. Each year they tried somebody, and he said yes. So that was fun. That was a great time.
That's fantastic. So you escaped from doing dangerous work?
So yeah, somehow, let's see here. Let's think of the order of things. I okay. Where did I go in between? I worked after working at those shows, and I can't remember exactly what happened in the middle there right now. I could shake my head, but I worked for the United Nations for a little while, but that's doing their little documentaries about what they do in their work worldwide. That was very interesting. But then the New York Times had a huge operation, New York Times Television. It was massive. Since then, it shrank down. But they had a ton of money, and they were hiring a lot of people to make documentaries for the Learning Channel. If anybody watches that, see, these are outdated things, because
Yeah,
now it would be on Hulu or Netflix, but at the time there was no Hulu and Netflix, so this was the version of Hulu and Netflix.
yeah,
So it was the Learning Channel and Discovery, Learning Channel and Discovery. And people still watch Discovery, I suppose, but now it's like motorcycles or something. In those days, those series were what they said. So Discovery was like about science, and Learning Channel was about learning. It was about some kind of, and then they've gone God knows where exactly. They really honestly do like build your own motorcycle, which is great, but I have no idea what that's got to do with Discovery or learning. But anyway, nonetheless, that they should have the motorcycle channel. But so New York Times had this huge operation, and the word got out, and that's again goes back to connect with your friends. Everybody tells everybody. The word around the community was there are jobs here, and they're giving sort of young producers opportunities. So it was actually my first job as a full producer was there, because they had so many, that they had two massive offices that were all over, in New York, and everybody was there. It was so funny to see all the people I'd met before, and still now, if I bump into anybody, it's like, oh, you worked at New York Times, like everybody did that at some point. And they had these series that were really fun and a little crazy, but they were all, and everyone watched them. So I had tons of fans, which was really weird. We did these shows called Trauma, Life in the ER, and Code Blue, and Maternity Ward, and they were all behind the scenes. And the reason they existed was because technology had changed cameras from this to
Yes.
this.
Yes.
So suddenly so I was filming along with, so we could bring all these cameras in to all these different spaces where it would have been really difficult or impossible to have cameras before.
Right.
And so it was this very exciting new thing. And there was a big hunger for it. And so I did it all. I was in, emergency rooms, emergency helicopters with EMTs, you name it. I was in Las Vegas, I was in Savannah, Georgia. I was producing, and then I had a crew of 5 uh cinematographers or camera people who and me, I also filmed as well. And I then had a senior producer who kind of helped pull the whole thing together. And my first one was a 12-part series, and the second one, so he was really managing the whole series. I was really the person in the field. I did the post as well, but it really required that team of the senior producer and me. And then I had this amazing team, and we were in, that's what I did for almost 10 years or something in there. Between that and when I went to ABC, the same thing. I was always being embedded. I was the era of being embedded. I didn't go embed with the military, but I embedded with everybody who's doing something crazy and fascinating.
Yeah, I had one TV series experience, which was on Addicted. I was an associate producer, and my job was really casting. And
That's interesting.
yeah, so I was casting the addicts who were in the, last moments of their life. And
Hmm.
we would offer them to have an intervention and 6 months of treatment in exchange for being on the show. And
Very interesting.
so we had field producers who would
Hmm.
embed with the addicts while they were using.
Right.
It was ridiculously dangerous.
That was me.
Yeah, I was never one of those people, but I just thought, you people are crazy. That was TLC. That was TLC.
DLC.
It's like,
Yeah.
you people are crazy.
Hmm.
They're having field producers who know nothing about addiction embedded with an addict who's shooting up heroin every day, 5 times a
Yeah. I
day.
mean, I didn't do that, and I always worked with a team. Actually, it's not true. When I was at ABC, I did some insanely dangerous stuff, and I was alone. But that was after I had been doing it already for about 5 years. But
Right.
but yeah, that's what was going on. Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Except we had a really good team. I mean, I'm a big believer in working with other people. I tell everybody, unless you really aren't comfortable and really have social anxiety issues, I highly always recommend I have partners on everything I'm working on now, because not because I don't think I can do things by myself, but you save so
Wow.
much time. First of all, I just think it's fun. I come from a big family. Like, I like having people around, but also, like, I don't want to ever go down a path, whatever the thing I'm doing, whether I'm writing a screenplay or whether I'm working on a doc. I don't want to go down some path and realize I've spent months or weeks or whatever on this path and realize that it was a stupid path, when all I could have done is had a conversation with someone who really understands and is equally invested in it, and they, keep us on the right path.
Yeah, that's great. And I also, there were just some things about television I found very strange. And one of them, I like to tell the story about this, I don't know, 30-page contract that I had to sign or something. And basically every page was, um, you're not covered for accident, you're not covered for this, you're not covered for that. And then the last page of the contract said, and if there's anything that we didn't mention,
You're not covered for that either.
you're not covered for that either. And I burst out laughing when I
Oh my God.
was
Oh
like,
my
wow.
God. Yeah.
So
I,
yeah.
I was covered. At least when I worked at ABC, I was covered. I'll give them that credit.
New York Times.
New York
Yeah.
Times, I was covered. Yes, I
Yeah.
didn't have to sign anything like that because I really
Wow.
was in danger sometimes. I had to wear Kevlar when I was working at ABC because I was embedded with the NYPD homicide unit, and I was in danger.
Yeah.
Not all the
Wow.
time,
Right.
but
All the
sometimes.
time, but
Enough.
so
Yes.
so what was it that had you decide I'm going to make my own stories? How did you get to that decision?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's another side of me that is certainly very odd, given the fact that I've worked with, I mean, when I say I was embedded with NYPD, I mean, I was present for every homicide to take place in Manhattan for an entire 12-month period. And when I was doing those shows in the ER, I mean, the amount of death that I dealt with on a daily basis was staggering, I would say. No, nobody, no, except for cops and doctors, deal with that, really. So
And
so
I'm sure they didn't say, oh, and here's some mental health support for you.
no, no, but they did pick, somehow intuitively they picked people who were okay with it.
Mm.
All of the people I worked with, I don't know, we all had I mean, yeah, most people, some people left because it was too hard. But
Mm.
not everybody. Like, the ABC figured out that I was good at dealing with those kinds of situations, and not everybody was on the hardest, most dangerous
Mm.
beats, but some people were. And yeah. But anyways, to the other thing that I did, which I had done my whole life somewhat, but was something I was much scareder of, so I tiptoed through it, was one is I also write comedy. Sounds crazy given the work that I do, but one of the things that got me through sometimes was
Yeah.
writing sort of a comedic
Yes.
version of what I was experiencing. And so when I would be in between, because the most difficult part of documentary filmmaking, television, whatever, is the in between. So, because jobs are not just always there, they don't always go from one to the next. There's a lot of in between stuff, and I don't know a single filmmaker, television, maker, unless they're an executive, who, or someone who's just kind of been like, I do know a few people who went to ABC as interns, and then they moved up in the ranks and just stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed and stayed. Um, Everybody else has those in betweens, and they're really hard because
Mm.
you have to remind yourself of, what, that you did something really great, and that you can move to the next thing, because you have a project that's all completely all absorbing. So it's not
Right.
like while you're working on this project you can go and talk to somebody about another job, right?
Right.
And then the job ends,
Yes.
and then you also have to recover. I mean, I did used to go, and I took trips to recover from some of the violence that I saw, and I would take a few weeks and go somewhere very calming, a beach somewhere calm, and get past the nightmares, and then come back. And then if someone didn't call me right away, I would start getting anxious about, why is someone not calling me for the next gig, you know and that, then someone would call, and then it would build, but it would just, you know that's tricky. And so, um writing comedy in the middle of that was really great, was a really good thing. But then I tried to enter that world, and that's a whole other story. I don't know if you want to hear that, but there's
Yes.
there's a whole other story of that, which is pretty crazy. But
Did
I
you
did
do
have a whole
stand-up?
experience.
Did you do
Uh,
stand-up, do you mean?
no, no, no,
No.
no,
Oh, okay. Not stand-up comedy,
no, no.
but going through the screenwriting process and trying to get the script.
Screenwriting, TV writing, wrote a lot of, spec scripts for TV shows and so on. But also, I don't want to name the show, because for various reasons, but there was a very, very, very popular comedy show that had a lot of writers on it, and this is a long time ago, um, that I really wanted to get on as a comedy writer, but it was not it was like a, um, it was anyways, I can't want to give away what it was, but in any case, the point is I got hired on as a writer for that show. One of the hardest auditions I've ever had, you would call, as a, it was tryouts. It was harder than getting into college. And then I got this job. It went on, and the last thing they said was, we just need to introduce you to the host, because it was a host driven show. And it was and when the guy saw I was a woman, he said no. I was going to be the first woman on
Wow.
that writer on the show. And
Wow.
and he walked in the room, saw I was a woman, and just said no and left.
Oh my God, how painful.
Yeah.
How awful.
Because he couldn't have said no for any other reason. I was just sitting there.
Right.
There was no other thing to me except for the fact that I was a woman.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
That was 1997, 98, 97, 98.
Awful, awful.
And then that really threw me off that vision, because I was really excited about that. And that was a new journey I wanted to try out. Not that I was unhappy with what I was doing, but I was a little struggling with the in-betweens of the documentary, and a friend of mine had suggested being on the show because they were longer runs. You stayed on this show, and you signed a contract for years.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was doing. I was about to sign a contract for years. Yeah. And then
when I was in my early 20s, my only thing I was interested in was working for the BBC.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up working for the BBC through a temp agency. And I was in that department. Then I was working for Radio 3, and I ended up working for the guy who scheduled everything, scheduled all the producers on all the shows. And so I said, can I ask you for some advice about, building a career here? And he said, oh, we never hire women.
There you go.
And my dream was completely destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have, sort of family support or know how to talk it through and just move on to the next one. But I never went back to work for the BBC.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Many women have had that experience.
Yeah. That was really that was a massive blow, and I really had to think it through. And it kept me away from something that I loved doing, which I've now come back to now, which is a strange thing on its own, but it was definitely a big shock. So but I think I also lost track. Oh, the independent filmmaking. So it was my own stories. Yes. So partly, I wanted to do stories of my own, but I was definitely very aware I didn't have financial stability. So I just needed the work. I needed to go from job to job. I knew people who were making their own films, and they all had family money, to be quite honest. And if they didn't, I have a very good friend who is a brilliant documentary filmmaker. He does not have family money that I'm aware of. He just is the most resilient person who this is actually a really good story, because he has a big film that's probably going to be nominated it might have been nominated for Academy Award. It's called Sabbath Queen. His name is Sandy Dabowski.
I just saw it last week.
Oh, well, did you see my
I saw Sandy in Miami Beach.
Oh, you did? So Sandy and I are old friends, and he's a fantastic and brilliant person, and I love him so much. And he and I have started at the same time, and we took this very different path, which was I went and worked for other people, and he fundraised to make his own film. And really what it was about confidence, I think, in a lot. I also wanted to learn my business. That there was also that, and he learned by making his own work. And so
I actually, Trembling Before God.
Yes.
When I ran a cinema, we had Sandy there to show his 10-minute fundraising reel, and we did a big fundraising event together for it. And he had already been fundraising for a long time before he got that 10 minutes, you know?
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
he had been fundraising, I think, for 7 years or something. I mean, it really took tenacity, and I think he must have been doing various jobs. I don't know exactly. We didn't keep in, I didn't have that confidence to necessarily ask him exactly how are you living and
Yes,
raising
yes,
this
yes.
money, because
Paying
that also
rent.
seems like a rude question. I don't know. Maybe he was living with his mother. I don't know. But in any case, he had this both determination and perseverance, oh, that's the same thing, and confidence
Yeah.
in the fact that he was making something of value. And I did not feel ready that even though I had all kinds of stories ready, millions of them, that I didn't feel ready to go and ask people for money to ask to have me make them. And that's a really interesting, and that's how I met you, actually, was a really interesting experience, because I had started finally in the last few years after being in the industry. I realized last month that it was my 30th year in documentary filmmaking. And that after all this time, it took me not the 30 years, but about 5 years ago is when I started feeling, maybe people are actually going to give me money to make my own thing. And so I certainly made, I was nominated for an Emmy before that, and I made a huge series where I was, I was my own creation at ABC, but they had already known me. They gave me money. It's not that I wasn't confident. I literally produced and directed and wrote and created an entire,
Storyteller. As a
what's that? As a
story.
storyteller. I was confident in that. I brought them the project. I knew the people there. I had it. It was incredibly successful. I loved having to, I was in charge of my own operation at ABC. They gave me my own department. I mean, it was pretty special. So it wasn't that I didn't feel like I was a great storyteller and I could really do all those things, but there was something about the story that just asking strangers, maybe new people, for money, um, that was hard. That was always a challenge. And that's why I came to you, of like, how do I do this without going to my friend at ABC and just saying, hey, I have a series, because not everything is aimed for ABC, and some of the places I worked at don't even exist anymore. So sometimes you have to go to new people. And that was the part that threw me, because I had gotten really good at, I can ask this person who I know, can we put this show on? And I did that many times. But it was a whole other story when I had to just say, are you, stranger, going to be interested in giving money for this project?
Yes,
And
I
that's
was just talking to a friend who's the executive director of a nonprofit I'm involved with, and we did a very last minute little end of year giving and
Mhm.
raised $38,000, which would not have happened if I hadn't have just been whining and complaining,
Mhm.
And two other nonprofits that I'm working with, we started down the road, but it didn't actually happen. But with those nonprofits, the executive directors are super well known in the industry, have never asked people for money.
Right. Right.
But that's changing.
That's changing. Well, I've been learning. I mean, I've been having a really interesting experience since I first originally talked to you, because I've been working on a new series and learning and working with an astonishing, wonderful producer who's been an independent producer all along. All the times that I was at the network, she was an independent producer, and she is a master of how to, I mean, I knew how to make budgets, but I didn't know how to make budgets in the same way, because my budgets were all based on the fact that there was a certain expectation that that I was going to get them. I wasn't going to have to convince someone to
Right.
be maybe that. And she had made, she'd made connections at big organizations, and knew who the development people were who had money and so on. And it's been an incredible learning experience. For after I say I worked in the business now for 30 years, but in the last year and whatever, not years, 6 months that I've been working with her, I've learned a whole new thing.
Yes, yes. The fundraising is a whole different thing. And
Mm-hmm.
the storytelling is one thing, but the fundraising is another new skill. And
Yeah.
it's not particularly rocket science, but there's also a piece of it which is to do with mindset. That
Mhm.
that's also something to overcome. That is that you can't just say, well, read this book and then your mindset will change or something.
Right, right, right.
That's a harder piece. So what are you working on right now in terms of your projects?
I'm working on 4 things, so it's important to keep this plate spinning because I'm probably working on a 5th thing that is suddenly slipping my mind. Um, but I for the one that I spoke to you originally about was a documentary about a Ukrainian all-girls rock band who were refugees from the war, and we ended up partnering with their refugees actually in Germany right now, and I was really struggling to get the U.S. market to be particularly interested in the story. So here's another little tip in terms of how to get who to find to get your work out there. Was I didn't have that the European market was interested because, and particularly the German market was interested because it was a good reflection on Germany that Germany is taking such good care of its refugees.
Yes.
And so I've partnered with a German company, and they're that also helps me in terms of my financing the picture because they are local, so they can also, if we do a last minute shoot, they can send a local thing. So that was something that was an interesting project, and it has its bumps, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Not with them, but with the subject matter, subjects,
Oh,
because
yeah. Well, it's a very it's interesting because you started out the conversation today talking about working with the girls in
Mhm,
and here you are with the girls and they're all completely traumatized. And
mhm.
so that is a very, very nuanced, difficult kind of work to be working in that level of trauma that
Yep.
people are experiencing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no question that I'm drawn to the trauma.
Yeah,
You'll see when I list the other thing that I was asked then to co-produce a documentary about the largest coal mining disaster that happened in West Virginia 10 years ago, and it was became a corporate crime, and then and then now the question is, how do the people who suffered from that, this town that was abandoned and left behind after this disaster happened, and all, 29 miners died, and it shut down this whole entire community. How do people rise from the ashes? And then it's also a little bit of a environmental
yeah,
um, film because the people are going into lines of work like solar and so on. But I can't tell
yeah.
more details about that because
That sounds
there's certain
fantastic.
things that are unknown at the moment regarding it. So,
Yeah,
but it's definitely been an interesting experience.
yeah,
And I've loved, actually, I'd never, that's the other thing that I love about the work that I do when I get to do it is travel, all the places. I'd never been to West Virginia before, and it was a fascinating experience. I loved it.
right. Yeah, it's beautiful. West Virginia,
Beautiful.
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 Um, so do you think we'll see either of these projects this year?
Maybe we'll see.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, yeah.
2020, end of 2025.
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm. Yes,
Fantastic.
hopefully. And then finally, the comedy writing. My sister and I wrote a screenplay that now has a wonderful producer, and we're about to do, we're looking for great actors, and it's really getting some attention. And so it's exciting. So that one too.
And the comedy is back.
The
It's
comedy is back.
it's really interesting that you do this work that's so, oh, did I
You froze.
freeze? Oh,
You
can you
did.
hear me?
Now I hear you.
I
You're back.
froze, yes. Uh, the Wi-Fi worked for 59 minutes, so we
Exactly.
could great for
Perfect.
59 minutes. So I'm just so thrilled. Thank you so much for taking the time
Thank you for
today.
having me. I hope it will be helpful to your listeners and viewers, or.
Yeah, it's just so interesting here. You really had some fantastic tips. Were calling them tips as you were going along, like, oh, you
Mhm.
could do that. And I think that, and I'm really excited to hear that you're continuing with the fundraising and with the learning the fundraising,
Mhm.
because even though I say fundraising is not rocket science, but it you do get better over time, and the more you do it, the better you get, the more money you raise, the more another project, the more people you know, and it's
Absolutely.
journey. The fundraising is a journey,
It's a
and then you
journey.
have the great projects to bring on the journey, but the
Mhm.
is really something that is very, very hard, and it's possible. That was really fun to have the little Sandy Dubowski
It's amazing.
in
I want
there.
to make a little plug for something I'm on the board for, which is called New York Women in Film and Television. I'm on a VP of Education and Advocacy for New York Women in Film and Television, and they're an incredible organization for anybody in the sort of tri-state area. And I think there are WIFs. There's like a Florida or Miami WIF or something, Women in Film and Television. And those are organizations that are also really great, given some of the subjects we were talking about in terms of the struggles, which are less but not gone at all in the filmmaking industry for women. And we have, that's also a great place to meet people and work with people, because the women who I'm working with right now, I met all of them for my comedy, my producer I met there, and so on.
Yes,
So
yeah, thanks for that plug. And yeah, I'm a member down here in Florida, and then and now you just reminded me I was going to join, and then I just forgot. So I'm going to join New York Women in
yeah,
Film.
it's wonderful. Oh, actually, if you're going to join, let me know, because as a board member, I can give you a little push up, like it helps the process faster.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah.
I'm in.
Should I join and then write to you, or
No,
should
write me first.
I
Write me
write to you
first, and
first?
I'll
Okay,
send you the little, it's called a board invitation, and you get,
great.
you know.
Yes, I just realized I forgot all about it, so I want to do
It's
that.
great. It's a wonderful organization, and we're doing master classes actually, which have been also a really good helpful thing for people to, when they're on their own feeling a little lost. The master class is also really helpful.
Yeah,
So
women definitely need that support. And also, I know we're at time, but I just want to ask you one more question.
mhm.
Are you seeing more support in terms of mental health for the kind of work that you were doing all those decades? Is there more?
Some places were giving it. Um, it's a good question, and I should ask my colleagues. People don't do that so much anymore, except for the news. Like you have the news crews, right, who always have done that historically, since ever there was, television, radio, news, people going into war zones and so on, and or the fires and all that. And I assume so. I would say I'd be very surprised these days if there wasn't some mental health support. There was in the
Right.
zero in the early 2000s and before. But a lot of people do things on their own independently, and therefore they don't have that resource. And again, that's why a place like NIWIFT is helpful, because they do have those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Wonderful.
So
Okay. Well, thank you
nice
so
to
much
see you
for
again, Joanne.
being in touch.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I want to know when the films come out. I'm very, very
I
excited.
will definitely let you know.
All
Take
right.
care. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. And thank you,
Bye.
Emily. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
Emily. Bye, Emily.
Bye.